Even though he was widely respected in our community, my father began physically abusing me when I was only 12 years old. However, this was not the worst part. At the age of 16, I saw him make his way to the cramped bedroom where my younger sister, who was 7 at the time, slept. When I realized this, I knew he needed to die to end his earthly misery. This decision was not taken on the spur of the moment. It sent a shiver down my spine and gave me an unshakable sense of certainty, much like cold ice water. My younger sister's innocence or his life was at stake. Walter Johnson, the miserable man I called father, would not be missed by the world because I had seen and felt enough suffering. People around here refer to me as Miss Ellie, but my real name is Eleanor May Johnson. I've been fortunate to live through many of my 83 years, some of which I'd rather forget. I was born in Millbrook, Alabama, at a time when reliable electricity was considered a luxury. Could you please click the subscribe button before I continue with my story? It would be greatly appreciated by this elderly lady. This is not a story I often share. It took me more than 60 years to work up the courage to do it. Furthermore, I would be devastated if you did not read the other true stories of women who have overcome adversity and come out stronger. Continue now. Select the option. I will remain seated in my rocking chair until you arrive. When I look in the mirror now, I don't recognize the unruly braided girl I was as a child. Observing this elderly woman, I notice her white hair pulled back into a bun most of the time, her skin wrinkled from too much sun exposure, and the evidence of her labor in the form of blue veins on her hands. My mother gave me a rare eye color, light blue, and I was born with it. After witnessing so much evil, I can now recognize it long before it speaks. Thank God I am able to pay the mortgage on this small house in Savannah, Georgia, which I built through hard work and honesty. In the afternoons, I can relax in my porch rocking chair, and during the spring and summer, I can tend to my herb and flower garden. Please, darling, tell me your name and the location from which you are viewing. Simply put it in the comments section. The idea of my voice traveling places my aging legs cannot goes on and on. Who can say for sure? Who knows? Perhaps someone is keeping an eye on me from my hometown of Millbrook. Perhaps a Savannah native is here. We could prepare a meal with my homemade cornbread and sweet tea. I still have that magic touch when it comes to cooking, you know. I'm one of the grandmothers. They say the best food comes from an old pot. My outfits are usually quite simple, but they are always perfectly ironed. Getting dressed is a must for me before leaving the house. Dear, I may be getting older, but I'm far from dead. Life was ugly when I was younger, but I refuse to be ugly anymore. Despite the unexpected blessings, life has taught me some difficult lessons. The New Dawn Center has been around for 35 years. Initially, it was just a room in the back of my house where I took in a girl who had fled from her stepfather in the middle of the night. I recalled my past self, with the exception that this girl had an escape route, whereas I did not. More than 500 abused girls have found refuge at the center. 500 people who hopefully will not have to face the same problems I did. I've kept this under wraps for a long time. This story has stayed with me for more than 60 years. Because of how heavy the story was, even my late husband couldn't fully comprehend it. Given all of these details, he appeared to suspect that I was withholding information from him. He could see when I had nightmares and screamed in the middle of the night. A decent man, however, understood that I preferred to remain silent. He never really pursued his suspicions, however. Only because of him did I realize that not all men are monsters. My old man is sorely missed. After so much silence, it's difficult to open the bottle of the past. Perhaps now is the time to tell it and relieve the burden. My age is 83 years. Can they possibly hurt me anymore? Being silent protects monsters, not victims, as life has taught me. Hopefully, my experience will remind other girls that they are not alone and do not have to go through what I did, that other women have gone through the same experiences and are still alive today. Millbrook, my childhood home, was a world apart from today's urban centers. Everyone knew each other in this small town, like a church where after Sunday service, everyone is so nice to one another that even the darkest secrets are hidden. My father, Walter Johnson, ran a general store called Johnson's General Store. They sold pretty much everything. Food, cloth, candles, and implements are among the items available. People looked up to him, referred to him as Mr. Walter, sought his advice, and trusted him for it. He smiled and was friendly whenever he was around other people. At home, as soon as the door closed, he changed into someone else. We lived behind the shop. It wasn't spectacular, but it was a step up from other houses at the time. My sisters Betty and Sarah and I slept in one bedroom while my parents slept in the other. Betty, a shy girl with fearful eyes, was 2 years my junior. Sarah, the infant, was 7 years my junior. She was a lively, upbeat child who was the only one who could make my father laugh. My mother, Mary, was an extremely delicate creature. What I now know to be depression was actually a nervous condition that she had all her life. She lay in bed for days, her mind clouded by the medication she took, staring blankly ahead. On good days, she was affectionate, and her chess pie wafted across the street. Even her own daughters appeared unrecognizable on her worst days. Her blue eyes matched mine, and she was lovely to look at, but she was going out like a candle in the night. Our lives revolved around the general store. I spent much more time there than I did at school. I only went to school to get the bare minimum because, according to my father, a girl can't have too much education. His true intention was for me to learn the skills required to run the business, assist customers, and perform mathematical calculations. It all started at the store, where things began to go wrong. It felt like it happened yesterday in my mind. My age was 12. Late afternoon was the time. We still needed to get things done, even though the store had already closed to the public. As I did almost every day, my father asked me to help him close the cash register. As was customary, my mother was unable to leave her bed. Betty's future included a trip to the well for water. Sarah remained a small girl. The store was empty except for the two of us, and I still get a tightness in my chest whenever I smell coffee, kerosene, and molasses. "Come over here, my darling." He patted his leg and told him to sit on his lap. It appeared strange to me. I was no longer a little girl who sat on laps, but I continued to obey. From the start, I was obedient. I learned at a young age that if I disobeyed my father, I would undoubtedly receive a beating. Something changed, however, as soon as I took my seat. His fist was always moving. It started with my legs and moved upwards, touching me in ways that made me feel embarrassed and disgusted. I fell into a state of internal paralysis because I had no idea what was going on, but knew it was wrong. I tried to get up, but he firmly gripped me. "Please pay attention, young lady." In a low, bourbon-scented whisper that I had not noticed before, he threatened to reveal our little secret to anyone, including your mother, if I told them. He warned that if she had a nervous breakdown, she might die, and it would be your fault. He did not finish it that day. He released me when I was scared and confused, but that was just the beginning. In the following weeks, he consistently found a way to isolate me. It started with gentle touches, but quickly escalated. In private, I would weep because I couldn't understand how I had deserved this. When my mother was having one of those unusually clear days, I tried to tell her. "Girl, you're just making stuff up," she said. Your father is a decent man. He is a blessing to us. You won't hear many local women saying the same thing. Before taking another of those mind-numbing pills, she said nothing. I improved my hiding skills over time and learned to recognize his mood swings. It was the gentler tone of his voice, the way he stroked his mustache, and the overall appearance. Soon after, Betty became a target as well, so my sisters and I devised a secret warning system. She was only 7 years old when she first did it. I couldn't help but notice her quiet, distant expression when she returned from the store that day. Because that's how I normally react, I knew it was mine. I silently embraced her, and she began to cry. Words were unnecessary for us to understand what had happened. We then came to an unspoken agreement. When we saw Father, we would try to stay together, give each other a heads up, and never leave him alone with Sarah. The little one was the only innocent thing we had, and she filled the house with joy. To keep her safe, we would give up everything. The situation deteriorated further over time. My mother became increasingly preoccupied with her medication and eventually stopped participating in our family life entirely. She appeared to understand what was going on, but was powerless to stop it. Every now and then, I noticed her staring at us with an odd expression. We attempted to tell her, "I don't want to hear any lies from you, girl," but she simply ignored us. The community holds your father in high regard. We should be thankful that he watches out for us. She appeared to prefer to hide behind her medications than face the truth. Perhaps that was its exact nature. There was nowhere she could take her 3 young daughters, and she was frail. His support was critical to her survival. Putting on the act of not seeing made things easier. I planned my escape with Betty when I was 14 years old. A few months ago, I was able to stash a few pennies and nickels and save them. We planned to travel to Montgomery, the home of my mother's sister, so I packed the necessary clothing in small bundles. We knew the address because letters from her arrived from time to time, despite the fact that we had never visited. Something risky was about to happen. They were going to leave early in the morning and hitchhike with a trucker. Finally, I understand. However, it appeared to be our only opportunity while we were there. The bundles were hidden under the bed, but my father discovered them the night before we escaped. I had no idea how he assumed. Perhaps he noticed that money was missing. Perhaps someone overheard Betty and me chatting in a low voice. That night was the worst beating we'd ever received. The broom handle was his second tool after the belt. He yelled that we were unappreciative, despite the fact that he had provided us with shelter, clothing, and food. We did this to show our appreciation for his kindness. We were covered in purple and red as he pounded us until he was exhausted. That incident left me with a scar on my chin. He slapped me on the hand where his heavy ring was while I was defending Betty from a belt strike. Because the wound was so deep, the scar remains visible and can tell the story. My mother, who normally hides during these attacks, was hospitalized for 2 weeks due to a severe nervous breakdown. She had been noticeably absent since her return. Father became even more vigilant. Together, we could overcome any obstacle. Someone was always keeping an eye on you, whether at school, church, or even the well. It felt as if we were shackled. Father warned us that attempting anything similar again would result in far worse consequences. There will be no point in defeating you next time, you 2 ungrateful brats. I will simply cut you off. The worst part was that he kept his image as a decent family man, dependable store owner, and respectable citizen while in town. The sound of the doors closing was entirely unexpected. Before I continue with this story, I was hoping you would be so kind as to click the like button. What I'm about to say will be so heavy and difficult to hear that I'm willing to bet that many people won't be able to watch it. Those with a strong will listen until the very end and then give it a thumbs up. Would you dare to try? I plan to keep an eye out for anyone who appears capable of taking on this story. Around this time, I started taking bookkeeping classes taught by Mr. Tibbs, an elderly man who oversaw the store's finances. My dad came up with the idea. He saw that I was good with numbers and decided that I could help him save money by taking on this task instead. Mr. Tibbs, gentle and unassuming, did not inquire further when he noticed the scars on my arms or the bags under my eyes caused by a lack of sleep. He took the time to explain everything, and I now understand how to keep track of money coming in and out, calculate taxes, and keep everything organized. Unknowingly, he provided me with the means to end my oppressor. Strange thoughts kept running through my head as I studied the store's operations. I noticed, for example, that my father kept 2 sets of books, one for showing to the authorities and another for keeping track of the actual money coming in and out. Johnny Marks, a stocky distribution company owner with a scar on his face, would stop by once a month. My father's nerves would frazzle every time he arrived. Meetings like this took place in private, and my father would frequently drink more than usual afterwards. With the help of secretly reviewed documents and overheard conversations, I was able to piece together the story of how my father owed Johnny a large sum of money, and the debt was only going to grow. I discovered a long-running fraud in which he falsified financial records in order to pay less than he owed. Above all, I learned that Johnny is not the type of person to mess with. According to what I had heard, there were stories of people who offended him and then vanished. He allegedly had ties to Louisiana bootleggers, and his goons were not afraid to get their hands dirty. He would resolve conflicts on his own rather than calling the cops. I tucked all of these revelations away in the back of my mind like unfinished puzzle pieces. My learning, observation, and data collection continued unabated. Sarah, in particular, who was innocently growing up lovely and joyful despite the constant threat of danger, was my sister, and I continued to protect her as best I could. But I knew in my heart that he would eventually turn to the youngest. I was too familiar with the pattern to notice it. When I was 16 years old, my worst nightmare became reality. On that scorching January night, the heat lasted long after the sun had set. My mother had to be sedated after having a particularly bad day. Betty and I were washing the dishes from supper in the kitchen. Sarah, who was 7 years old, had already gone to bed in our shared bedroom. My father usually sat in the living room after dinner and listened to the radio, but I noticed he wasn't there. In my mind, an alarm rang. I grabbed the dish I was drying and bolted silently down the corridor. I looked over to see him standing at the door to our room, staring inside with the same expression he had when we first met years ago. My veins had frozen with blood. In my mind, it was Sarah, not her. Even as a young girl, she enjoyed playing with rag dolls. When he returned from the store, she would leap into her father's embrace and tell him stories from her school days. He would never put her through this. He was powerless to extinguish the joy and light. I moved forward mindlessly. "Daddy," I yelled, probably a little too loudly. He spun around in surprise, realizing he had been caught red-handed. His expression changed from one of shame to rage in an instant. He yanked me back into the kitchen by the arm. Betty stood motionless in the same spot, the dish towel still in her hands and her terrified eyes wide open. "Why are you spying on me?" He produced a low sound with his jaw. I worked up the courage to tell her to leave her alone. Sarah is still extremely young. Give her some space, please. He gave me the evil eye, as if I were a bothersome fly that he wanted to squash. I got shivers as he chuckled his laugh, devoid of humor. "What can I do to prevent this?" "You? What about your drugged-up, worthless mother? On the other hand, will you notify the authorities by calling them? Is that the revered Mr. Walter, who was always willing to help and regularly attends church despite abusing his daughters? No one will believe you, you foolish dweeb. I had a feeling he was right. In our small town, his words carried more weight than mine. He was a reputable merchant who had achieved success. As the daughter of a mentally unstable woman, I was just a girl. I threatened and I could scream, but I knew it wouldn't help. He chuckled again. Scream all you want. Tomorrow, I'll start with the youngest. I'm finished waiting. After that, I will look after the two of you. Unfortunately, mishaps do happen. Girls fall into abysses. Fires start in homes while the occupants are sound asleep. More real than anything else was the threat that hung in the air. It was clear to me that he could pull it off. Our honor as well as our lives was at stake. Dejected, I bowed my head. His fingers left crimson stains on my skin when he let go of my arm. Very nicely done. Put that image out of your mind and return to the dishes. The sentence was incomplete, but the message was clear. If you opened your mouth, it was your fault. Returning to the living room, he turned on the radio and exited the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Betty and I stood there quietly finishing up the dishes. However, there had been a shift within me. A clear decision was taking shape. I slept poorly that night, lying in the dark next to my sisters. My thoughts kept returning to everything I knew about my father, Johnny, and the altered financial records. A strategy began to emerge over time. If men's justice failed to help girls like us, I might have to resort to other means, ones that a man like Johnny Marks would fully understand. At the age of 16, I made a decision that would forever change the course of my life on that fateful night. If it meant smearing my hands with my father's blood to protect my sisters, especially little Sarah, I would do whatever it took. I believe I've gotten a little ahead of myself, so please wait a second. Allow me to transport you to my childhood home in Millbrook, Alabama during the 1950s. When it rained, the streets turned into mud pits because they were still unpaved dirt roads. The primary paint colors used to adorn the wooden houses were blue, green, and yellow, which helped to improve the view. We had a white one with blue windows, and it was behind the store. In the town square near the church, there was a gazebo where a small band would perform after Sunday services. After church, the men gathered outside Hank's barber shop to discuss politics and baseball, while the women gossiped behind closed doors. Before dinner, the children ran around freely playing tag and hide and seek. Although our home was smaller than others in the neighborhood, it was far from tiny. When Mama felt better, she would wash her clothes in the back area, which included 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a bathroom. Wooden planks creaked as we walked on them. Mama sewed the curtains for the windows herself before falling ill. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and sugar that wafted through the house from the store was the most distinguishing feature. Nothing but walls, furniture, and clothing. When I'm homesick, I close my eyes and can almost smell the scent, the few good ones naturally. Daddy was tall and stocky with broad shoulders and a neatly trimmed mustache. He always wore his hair in a bridal cream ponytail. On weekdays, he wore a sharp suit. Put on a white shirt, linen pants, and shiny shoes. Carrying an air of superiority, he greeted everyone with a wide grin that revealed his pearly white teeth. He was a regular at church, sitting in the front row and contributing his powerful voice to the singing of hymns. He consistently made monetary contributions at town meetings. The poorest families were occasionally uncharged because he loaned them supplies from the store whenever they needed them. What goes around comes around, he would say. Someone from God is keeping track of us. Everyone treated him with the utmost respect. They referred to him as Mr. Walter, tipped their hats in his direction, and even had their children address me as Mr. Walter's daughter, as if it were a noble title. He changed when he was at home. His expression was one of perpetual dissatisfaction, as if something was lacking in his life: the cleanliness of the house, the deliciousness of the food, or the obedience of his daughters. He would beat us at anything. He sees shattered glass, unfinished assignments, and a sassy response. As time passed, I was able to gauge his emotional state simply by listening to his footsteps, door-opening technique, and tone of voice when he beckoned to Mama. Even on the best days, we had to proceed with caution. There were good and bad days. Mary, my mother, was a stunning young woman. While I don't recall many instances of her genuine smile, I do remember how radiant she was when she did. She had light blue eyes like mine, long hair that she styled herself, and a fair complexion that made her easily sunburned. Prior to my birth, I heard from neighbors that she was a happy person who enjoyed singing while working. She wilted after that, like a flower that hasn't received enough water. The beginning was what she referred to as the endless sadness, which included periods of bed rest during which she would stare up at the ceiling. The town doctor's prescribed medication arrived in small black vials containing drops that left her disoriented, limp, and blind. She was often asleep and rarely spoke. There were days when she refused to wash her hair or change her clothes. On good days, which became fewer and fewer as the years passed, she would get up, clean the house, and cook meals. She used to bake my favorite chess pie. She would allow us to scrape the pan's bottom after she finished, and the entire house would be filled with a delicious aroma. Creamy with a distinct hint of burned caramel, the flavor was unlike any other dessert. My appreciation for chess pie was forever altered after she deteriorated. She appears to have made off with the secret. My sister Betty came 2 years after me. She was an introverted girl with large, fearful eyes that appeared to be looking for the worst. She was quiet, rarely smiled, and easily startled by sudden noises. Even as a young child, she had a unique ability to perceive her surroundings and grasp complex concepts with a little explanation. She retrieved objects from the air. She was my constant companion before Sarah. Our nightly ritual was secretive. Before going to bed, I'd make up stories about faraway lands where girls could play freely. Sarah arrived after I had been gone for 7 years, and Mama had been very ill. To everyone's surprise, she appeared. After all this time, no one believed she could ever become a mother. It was a challenging pregnancy. Mama spent most of her time in bed. However, the birth of my younger sister brightened our home. She was a plump infant with flushed cheeks and inquisitive eyes. She developed a fiery personality as she grew older, one that was outgoing, cheerful, and stubborn. Throughout the day, she would sing, make up games, and ask about everything. She was my father's one true joy, and everyone in the house enjoyed her presence. Unlike Betty and me, he was patient with her. If she wanted to show him a drawing or tell him a story, he would let her sit in his lap. His behavior towards her changed. When I was younger, I figured it was because she was the house doll and baby. I now realize he was simply biding his time until today. Johnson's General Store, located on Main Street in Millbrook, was a light blue corner building with black lettering spelling out its name. A broad entrance doorway led to 3 large windows flanked by elaborate iron bars. As far as a child could tell, inside was a magical world. Stacks upon stacks of brightly colored goods, such as sweets containers, grain and bean bags, carbonated water bottles, and peach preserve cans. My father served customers at the long, dark wood counter in the center, which had been polished with use. A large brass scale, which made a noticeable sound when weighing goods, was located in the right-hand corner. Back in the storeroom, sacks of rice, beans, coffee, sugar, and flour were piled to the ceiling. My father kept the money and did the accounting in a small office. No, it wasn't just a store. It acted as the community's beating heart. People went there for reasons other than shopping. Going there allowed them to talk, hear the news, and get some sound advice. Even down to the family's daily routines, my father knew everyone's names. "Hi, how is Mom doing? How has her cough improved? Are you stating that your son was hired in Birmingham? Will this year's harvest be good?" People discussed politics, commented on weddings and funerals, and spread rumors. "Have you heard how the cobbler's daughter ran off with Silva's boy? The new pastor allegedly has a relationship with the teacher." The store opened early at 6 a.m., with the exception of Sundays, which closed earlier at 7 p.m. As a child, I helped out by sweeping the floor and organizing the lower shelves. As I got older, my responsibilities grew to include serving customers, weighing products, and creating packages. By the age of 9, I could mentally calculate change, take orders, and perform simple arithmetic operations. I took great pride in hearing my father say that I had a business brain. He complimented me several times, which was unusual. I learned people-reading skills at the store, such as when Miss Garcia clutched her purse while describing her husband. Old, excuse me, sir. Jenkins begged for an extension on his bill payment deadline while lowering his eyes. And the Pereira girl, who looked exactly like me, always showed up with marks on her arms. It occurred to me that even the nicest homes can have the most hideous things going on behind closed doors. Everyone has secrets. I recognized the first signs that something was wrong with my father before I could make sense of them. When Mama was in her bed, he had a different expression on his face that made me want to flee. He insisted that I stay late at the store, ringing up customers' purchases and sending them on their way even after they had left. His comments about how I was developing into a beautiful young woman included compliments on my hair and legs. When he did it, I assumed it was the father's natural disposition. I see now that he was attempting to assess my abilities and prepare me for what was to come. I'll never forget that particular day. I was using a small stool to retrieve some boxes from the top shelf. His hand suddenly rested on my waist. He warned against falling, but the hand remained. As it moved up and down my side, it remained motionless, pressing gently against me. I did nothing because I couldn't think of anything to do. Even though it felt wrong, he was my father. Surely he would have known what to do. He grinned strangely and said, "You're growing up so fast, Ellie," as I got off the stool. "Your gender will change soon." On another occasion, he summoned me to the store's crowded back office. Daybreak had arrived. Our windows had closed. Mama had another bad day and spent the entire time in bed. Betty remained at home to care for Sarah and herself. When I walked in, the office smelled of musty old paper and pipe tobacco. Sitting in the large leather chair, he totaled the day's earnings. He told me to close the door and sit on the chair beside the desk. In an effort to determine whether any of the boys in my class had attempted to bully me, he began questioning me about my day at school. He felt compelled to protect me from these threats because of his role as my father. He stood up, walked around behind my chair, and placed his hands on my shoulders while speaking. I felt uneasy when he began massaging in an inappropriate manner. His deft fingers worked their way down my arms, around my shoulders, and then down my front. At that point, I stood up and yelled that Betty must be in need of assistance and I needed to go home. He allowed me to leave. However, in the days that followed, he grew distant from me, assigning me the most unpleasant tasks at the store, such as cleaning the dusty storage room and lifting heavy bags. Then came the day when everything changed. I was 12 years old. Late afternoon was the time. At that hour, the store had already closed, and sunbeams streamed in through the windows, casting a warm orange light that danced with the airborne dust. With the exception of Mr. Gerald, who had gone to deliver an order across town, no one else on the staff remained. His departure created a heavy silence that seemed to swallow everything, but the little bell on the door continued to ring. There was only my father and me in that enormous and oppressive store, and it felt like the world had ended. He routinely asked for my assistance in closing the register, tallying the cash, and entering the information into the book. We both huddled behind the weathered wooden counter. I leaned over a stool, my feet dangling loosely, and reached for the cash register using my neck. My little hand shook slightly as I wrote the numbers with the round, careful handwriting of a child. I wasn't looking directly at my father, but his expression as he watched me work sent shivers down my back. He was sitting in his chair, which made a noise when he shifted. Midway through the afternoon, the wall clock's tick-tock became more insistent than usual. When I stepped outside, I could hear the street noise fade away. His chair suddenly began to creak even more. "Come over here, my darling. Take your seat."